No one anticipated this, despite the years of rumors and whispers that trailed Joanie Lamb. Perry Stone has made astonishing revelations that are causing a seismic shift in the Christian community. His recent disclosure is not a theory. It alters our entire worldview, and it's true. The truth was lying in plain sight all along, and now that it has come to light, there could be huge consequences. Keep an eye out for more updates. This is just the start. It was unexpected. For a long time, Joanie Lamb was thought of as a reliable, trustworthy play a role in Christian television and radio. Dyer Television Network, one of the largest Christian media platforms globally, was co-founded by her late husband, Marcus Lamb, and she was a co-founder. She exuded an aura of purity, grace, and profound spirituality. She became an icon for millions of viewers, with integrity, consistency, and loyalty. However, once Perry Stone spoke up, the whole situation shifted. Perry Stone, a prominent figure in prophetic ministry, made a shocking public accusation against Joanie Lamb in a statement that stunned churches, ministries, and Christian groups online. Expected. Her leadership was not the only thing he questioned. Behind the scenes at Dyer, he depicted a world of control, manipulation, and covert power moves. Joanie wasn't simply a sympathetic bystander or a distraught widow carrying on her husband's work, claimed Stone. Family history. The cords were being pulled by her. The clarity, candor, and profound unease of his speech were striking. According to him, Joanie manipulated Dyer's spiritual path by using her financial might. Beyond the purely commercial aspect, but also the real statements being made during broadcasts. His account suggests that she manipulated programming decisions to further her own agenda, prioritizing some ministries over others, and acting in a self-serving manner. The gospel has become irrelevant. It centered on authority. The Christian community was at a loss as to how to respond. No anonymous third party offered this criticism. The man who had established his own devoted fan base through his frequent appearances on Dyer, Perry Stone, was the one saying this, so that he can come out with charges. This prompted them to pause and pay attention. And once they did, nobody could turn their ears off. Fans of Dyer's work for a long time began to ask challenging questions. Were their previous assumptions about Joanie Lamb incorrect? Had the network evolved into something other than a place of faith? Anything else totally? People were talking in churches, prayer groups, and online forums. It was a spiritual betrayal to some. They put their faith in Joanie. They had graciously invited her to stay with them. And now they were hearing rumors that perhaps it was all an illusion. There was a strong response. Immediate defense came from several Joanie supporters who claimed the accusations were baseless, motivated by jealousy, or simply misconstrued. Not everyone was convinced. Answers were what they sought. Transparency was what they sought. Plus, a lot of people were simply sad because they felt they had to choose between two leaders they respected. The silence from Joanie just made matters worse. She took some time to react as the news circulated. No explanation was offered, no statement was made, and no denial was made. To many individuals, that remaining quiet conveyed a variety of messages. Dignity, according to some. It was perceived as guilt by others. The harm had already been done. The words of Perry Stone had broken through the barrier. A tsunami of skepticism washed over the Christian media landscape as a result. Dyer lost his former luster in the eyes of society. One of the largest scandals in Christian television history has Joanie Lamb at its core, despite her reputation as a quiet, dedicated pillar. A lot more had transpired from what had been only a single statement. A complete breakdown in trust, faith, and leadership. Everything began to go apart as soon as Perry Stone's charges were made public. The once subdued background noise transformed into storm's epicenter. As members of the Christian media community, particularly those who had collaborated closely with Dyer, started to be more forthcoming with their stories, it became clear that they were no longer the admired Joanie Lamb. For a long time, Joni was thought of as Dyer's helpful wife and co-founder. She was there for Marcus Lamb through all of the sermons, broadcasts, and network expansions. Most people thought she was only carrying on his legacy after his death. Those who were there before, and those who worked behind the scenes say that Joni wasn't merely carrying on Marcus' work. She had assumed complete command. Things were modest at first. Alterations to the code were observed by the public. Some of the ministers were not invited to return. We stopped talking about some things. More than. Through the years, trends began to take shape. It appeared like the network went out of its way to promote and assist ministries that Joni believed in. The lineup gradually lost members who either disagreed with such opinions or didn't conform. And then the whispers about the money started. Speculation escalated into open debates on Joni's influence over Dyer and, by extension, other ministries, due to her considerable financial resources. She was able to secure substantial funds, both from the network and external donors. A number of stated that she allocated those cash only to amplify the voices she believed in. Some thought she maintained her power by secretly arranging transactions. There was discussion of anonymous donations, offshore accounts, and cash incentives for devoted supporters. Official publications and hard evidence were non-existent. The widespread dissemination of identical accounts, however, prompted some to question whether or not this was merely gossip. Everyone could agree on one thing: Joni was tremendously influential. Even outside of Dyer, others began to notice that Joni's ties appeared to continue further into uncharted territory. She was well connected with influential politicians, business magnates, and ministers. On the inside, there were many who thought she leveraged her connections to expand her influence even farther, perhaps swaying other Christian TV networks and guiding public discourse during elections, while shielding herself from criticism by forming alliances with important supporters. For many, the most disconcerting aspect of Daystar was the possibility that the content, the lectures, the worship music, and the interviews was not as genuine as they had believed. Was there an unseen hand shaping everything behind the scenes? I was struck by that thought. Listeners were hoping to hear God's voice, not a politically motivated, editorially skewed message. There were rumors that Joni had even banned specific speakers from returning to the network. I don't think it was because, contrary to biblical teachings, but rather because they did not align with her vision for Dyer. Those anecdotes suggest that airtime was withheld from anyone who did not support her. It was really that easy. Some ministers who had previously collaborated with Dyer began to subtly corroborate some of these claims. After being guaranteed airtime, one by one, they recounted the experience of being ghosted without providing any reason. A small number of people came clean about how they felt they had to change their message to keep up with the network. They understood the message even though they were never taught exactly what to say. Put away the clutter. Stay out of the story. Assure Joan that she is pleased. Plus, you were out of luck if you didn't. The fact that this was about more than just programming made even Joni's supporters nervous. Power dynamics were at play. Who gets to choose the messages that millions of people hear and see? Who has the privilege of vetting the Word of God as it impacts people's lives and the churches they attend? As time went on, more and more people started to wonder if Joni's involvement was too much. Personal anecdotes abound, detailing how Joni had a low tolerance for dissent, how she maintained a tight circle of trusted advisors and personnel, and how she promptly banished anyone who dared to question her authority. The vibe at Dyer shifted over time, according to one ex-employee. According to what they said, it was more like a family. After then, with Joni as queen, it seemed like a kingdom. The discussion was augmented by additional voices. Even long-standing fans who had begun to detect slight changes in the tone of Daystar's programming, as well as anonymous sources and former staff, were involved. They had a chat. A sense that things wasn't quite right. Lessons seemed more refined, less uncooked. It seems like the interviews were more controlled and predictable. Some thought the spirit had changed its appearance. There was a much broader question that all of this led to. Does Joanie Lamb's media empire consist of influence, wealth, and power, or is it a ministry? Well-controlled message? When someone has worked hard over many years to earn respect as a devout Christian, it is an exceptionally difficult request to make. However, individuals were compelled to face that question. Who asked it? Not only did outsiders. Many people in the church and the wider Christian community had grown up listening to Dyer's music. The more people dug, the more patterns they noticed, and the more Joni remained quiet, the more conjecture grew. It was concerning that she didn't reply to many. Why not come out and set the record straight if these things weren't true? It would be more effective to confront the rumors directly and provide honesty. In spite of the fact that everything had changed, she continued on as if nothing had happened. In that instant, Perry Stone felt like lowering a drape. The public did not perceive a single powerful figure. People thought the system had gotten used to running itself without anyone holding it to account. Whether it was her fault or not, Joni was now that system's public face. The ongoing discussions have completely altered the long-held perception of Joanie Lamb as an amiable and devoted leader who stood in her husband's shadow. A tremendous wave swept across the Christian world when Perry Stone's charges against Joanie Lamb became public. This was no ordinary tale. A full-blown crisis had occurred, and the response was swift, passionate, and polarizing. A group of people zealously defended Joni by her side. On the opposite side, many were startled, furious, and wanted answers. At that moment, the periphery vanished. Loyalty or accountability became the de facto choice for the people. This news came as a shock to many who had been following Dyer for a long time. After years of following Joni, praying with her, and having faith in her, they finally her work in the ministry. Some had shared her words with loved ones, attended her gatherings, or donated financially. The rumor mill was turning, and now they were hearing that she may have been using their trust for personal gain. Something was off. They were taken aback, perplexed, and even sold out. This wasn't merely a scandal for them. For me, it was a matter of faith. The internet went boom. Both camps fought on social media platforms including Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Many have expressed their hope that Joni and her, fearing for her spiritual well-being, her relatives rallied around her. People weren't shy in accusing her of being deceitful, selfish, and dishonest. Trending hashtags emerged. A mashup of genuine worries and conspiracy ideas upon each and every new post, when, moreover, each video on YouTube fanned the flames even more. There were other videos with pastors' reactions, influencer criticism, testimony from former Daystar employees, and excerpts from Perry Stone's statements. There was it all over. Religious community forums all of a sudden became focused on Joanie Lamb. Many were attempting to decipher the veracity of the claims and their implications for the trajectory of Christian media. The schism was equally noticeable in prayer circles and churches. Not all pastors urged calmness. The complete story is yet unknown, they would state. We should seek God's will before passing judgment. There were some who were more forthright. Christian leadership is in deep trouble if even 50% of this is correct. Without a consensus on what to think, members sat still. Some others just couldn't bring themselves to bring it up in conversation. Both the discomfort and the complexity were too much. Differently, Christian media outlets responded. A handful of religious media reported the news with caution. They admitted that Joni was wrongly accused, but they highlighted the lives that Dyer had affected and Joni's decades of ministry. They portrayed it as a difficult time, a miscommunication, or a chance for introspection and growth. Some even went so far as to urge viewers to stand together and not to belittle one another, Christians as a whole. The tone, however, was different outside of the Christian society. Investigative journalists and secular media jumped in with both feet. Exposed corruption and scandal were terms that appeared in headlines. Journalists began drawing connections. Things that had never been brought to light before, such as Joni's influence and Dyer's wealth. Some online exposes and documentaries have gone so far as to cast doubt on the televangelism model altogether, using this controversy to demonstrate how problems arise when power gets concentrated in the wrong hands. They thoroughly investigated the entire system, not merely Joanie. Joanie Lamb, meanwhile, was remarkably quiet. Whoa, that quiet said it all. It was a powerful statement to her backers. She will not partake in rumors, they declared. She's letting God fight her battles. Her detractors saw it as shyness. They wanted to know if she was innocent, so they said, "Why isn't she saying anything? Why isn't she denying it?" Those who were still on the fence started to feel nervous, too. There was more room for supposition the longer Joni remained silent. Plus, in this era of constant news coverage, remaining silent only serves to heighten interest in a topic. A component of the controversy was the enigma. Even inside Dyer, chaos reigned. Word got out that the employees were at odds with one another. There were those who were completely faithful to Joni and would never leave her side. As a result of concerns for their reputations or a lack of trust in leadership, some began to seek out ways out. A number of former employees started coming out, some in an anonymous fashion and others in a more public forum, providing details that bolstered the initial claims. It wasn't merely that Joni had control. It was how she used it, claimed one former employee. According to another, we all felt like we were walking on eggshells. One wrong move and you were out. It's disheartening to hear stories like this because they show how quickly things can change. Situations that are more problematic. No one could help but pause, not even those who wanted to think Joni was innocent. It seemed like there were a lot of warning signs, and everyone were saying the same things. Quickly, the trust began to crumble. Furthermore, a sizable contingent of staunch backers dug in. It was brought up that Perry Stone was involved in controversy himself at one point. His intentions were cast into doubt. Why now? They inquired. For what reason would you want to make this public? Maybe it's retaliation. Might it have any sort of personal dimension? Some claimed that, driven by vanity or envy, he was attempting to depose a female leader. They maintained Joni had been an obedient servant throughout her life, and that the charges were being overstated. The impact of the ministry was more significant than any rumor. Both public opinion and the Christian community were deeply divided as a result of this split. It prompted awkward inquiries. Could you tell us who to trust? In what ways could we resolve scandals involving top executives? What should we do when the ministry we care about gets into a scandal? Quiet meetings were instituted in churches. Government agencies began assessing their own policies. Preachers who made use of the controversy in sermons to avoid taking sides, but rather to discuss the perils of unbridled authority, the value of openness, and the necessity of holding even revered leaders responsible. Dyer's standing began to change. A few people went so far as to switch off the TV altogether. Some others were tuned. Further, in the hopes of receiving a reply or observing the ministry's handling of the matter. Behind the scenes, sponsors and contributors began to ask questions. It seemed like everyone was putting pressure on us. Meanwhile, the media remained glued to their screens. Investigators persisted in their work. The people waited while social media remained active. They came here with mixed emotions, some hopeful, others bitter, and many grieving the loss of what was once a house of worship. The schism hurt more than just Joanie Lamb's credibility. Something more fundamental was broken. The idea that there is a special protection for Christian leaders against being corrupt. It provided as a timely reminder that everyone is subject to accountability, regardless of their level of spirituality or length of service. That message was the most important takeaway from the media craze. The aftermath of Perry Stone's charges was visceral and depressing. What began as a stunning remark soon expanded into something far more substantial. Joanie Lamb was no longer the only focus. Issues of trust, leadership, and the precariousness of things were key. Truly are, even in seemingly robust missions. As the smoke cleared, it became clear that not only had one individual, but a whole network, viewers, and religious communities suffered severe harm. Dyer was co-founded by Joanie Lamb and her late husband over many years. It evolved into among the world's most prominent Christian media outlets. The show attracted millions of viewers each week. Wherever individuals sought solace, direction, or inspiration, in their homes, churches, or hospital rooms, the network reached them. Dyer was perceived by many as a anchorage for the spirit. And Joni wasn't only a TV host in the eyes of those same folks. For believers, she represented a mother figure. The fallout was so severe because of that. No famous person was involved. There was a character that the audience put their faith in. Dyer was caught in a storm after the claims were made public. People started to tune out. As a result of their confusion, longtime viewers stopped tuning in. The ministry's former financial backbone, donors and sponsors, became wary. A few people stopped talking. Some people receded silently. Nobody wanted their name associated with a scandal, particularly if it cast doubt on the whole enterprise. The reputation of Dyer, as a sanctuary of unwavering faith, was abruptly tarnished. The strain was building up behind the scenes. The staff was split because they still thought Joni had been misunderstood or falsely charged. Several of them remained loyal to her. Some started speaking up or even leaving because they had grown weary of her leadership style. Rumors of departures, discord within the ranks, and a lack of clarity at the top pervaded the building. No longer was the network characterized by its oneness. Rather, it was tense. There was the same amount of distrust within the building as there was outside. Joni continued to maintain a low profile in public. Just a handful of events featured her. She continued to host shows without responding to the allegations. The lack of speech was more painful for many. Some defended their decision not to respond to the assaults by saying it was a display of strength. Still others contacted. A blunder, a flight of fancy that served only to heighten the suspicion. Most people were looking for an explanation. The genuine questions were left unresolved in favor of carefully orchestrated appearances and optimistic messages. The pressure wasn't all on Joni, though. Everyone in the Christian media industry felt the heat. A number of other ministries and networks have started looking at their own leadership and finance processes. Is this something that could happen in other places? Had previous leaders allowed themselves to be overly lenient? Power? Was this merely the beginning of a much larger phenomenon? Doubt began to sweep over the community. Ministries that had hitherto been unquestioned were now under intense examination. For others, it served as a wake-up call. They felt that the church, particularly in the media, had shifted its emphasis from serving others to cultivating a positive public image. Less reliance on top-down charisma and more transparency were among their demands for change. They wished for ministries, to get back to what they were originally meant to do: serve people. Increasing sway. There was an uptick in discussion on a leadership transition back at Dyer. Some on the inside thought Joanie needed a break, if only temporarily, to give himself time to heal and rebuild. There were some who believed her removal would exacerbate the situation, that it would further fragment the network and leave an unfilled leadership position. In reality, there were no simple solutions. Rather, difficult decisions were required in every aspect. Also, attorneys started chiming in. Should any portion of the significant repercussions might ensue if the charges were proven to be accurate. Dyer faces potential probes, fines, and perhaps the revocation of his broadcasting licenses. That increased the stress level even further. Public opinion was no longer the sole determinant. Survival under the law was at stake. At one point, it appeared implausible that Dyer could face shutdowns or litigation. It was no longer so unbelievable.